Hello and welcome to the podcast from Diggers and Dreamers, the organisation that's been the face of communal living in Britain since the 1980s. Whatever kind of intentional community you're interested in, whether it's communes, co-ops, co-housing or anything else, Diggers and Dreamers is where you begin. And now, here's our podcast host, Kirsten Stevens-Wood.
Our guest today is Paul Sedgwick. Paul started life living in the 1960s community Families by Choice. I say started, he was 3 years old when his parents made the decision to join an experimental therapeutic community formed by the psychotherapist Catherine Ginsberg and based in Kew, London. Having grown up in community, Paul then left as a young adult to pursue a career in teaching, only to then come full circle a number of years ago and is now a member of the senior co-housing group Still Green, based in Milton Keynes. Join us on the Diggers and Dreamers podcast to hear all about Paul's journey from one type of community to another. Hello and welcome to the Diggers and Dreamers podcast. Today's guest is Paul Sedgwick, and I'm going to allow Paul to introduce himself. So good morning and welcome.
Hello, I'm Paul, and I live in Wolverton in Milton Keynes, and I've lived here since the mid-1980s.
So it sounds like it was quite a lovely place to grow up as a child. I'm wondering how it was to be a young adult or a teenager in that community, Paul.
I preferred it actually as a teenager because I liked the fact that there were lots of adults around. Some people didn't. Some people found it restrictive in that there were too many people who knew about your life, and therefore you didn't get the privacy that you needed to be a teenager. And if you did something wrong, everyone knew about it. And certainly there was that feeling. I can remember one instant where my mum said, and I won't use a real name, you didn't go home with Jonathan, meaning home from school. And I said, no, of course not. He was on one side of the playing field and I was on another. And it was obvious that there was an expectation that somehow you would go walk home with people from secondary school, with people from the community. And it wasn't what you wanted to do or felt like doing or whatever. So some people found the fact that there were lots of adults who knew about what you were doing rather restrictive, particularly if you had boyfriends or girlfriends or whatever.
That's right, lots of eyes watching and lots of people to report back if they chose to do that, yes.
Yeah, I found it actually almost the opposite. I liked the fact that I had relationships with adults who weren't my parents. And the more so as I got older, particularly from about 15, 16 upwards until I left home, I quite enjoyed that and learned a huge amount. I mean, some of the people there were fascinating individuals with a huge wealth of life experience and a whole range of different backgrounds. And personally thought that outweighed the disadvantages. But some people always found the disadvantages too restrictive. So
in some ways, what you're describing is almost like taking the ideas, I guess, of Catherine Ginsberg, the idea of this extended family. There's sort of aunts, uncles, people that you can turn to who are a supportive extra to that nuclear family model.
And that's really important because Catherine Ginsberg, she'd seen kibbutz movements in Israel in the 30s and in the 40s. And she liked the collective nature, but she didn't like the fact that it detracted from the nuclear family. she used to call the nuclear family the bloody family, only half joking and in a German accent and not with 100% command of English. But it's very true, you know, that the nuclear family, it has its advantages, but it can also be awful and bloody and horrible.
Yes.
So
Well,
when
and just quickly, for those people perhaps who haven't heard of kibbutzes, they have children's houses, don't they?
they did, yeah,
and they. I mean, I don't think they do that anymore. But they used to separate the children, and they used to grow up almost apart from their
that's right.
parents.
They were children of the kibbutz, and their own blood parents were not necessarily the most important adults. The adults who ran the children's house were the most important. And as I say, Catherine didn't like that. But equally, she knew only too well as a psychotherapist the problems of the nuclear family and the huge difficulties it did, and you know, all the problems that are behind those nice houses in suburbia. So when thinking about the disadvantages of community living, one also has to think, well, what's the alternative? If it's living as a nuclear family in an isolated house where you don't really know anyone, I don't think, you know, I don't think that's a difficult choice. But there are people who really, really, really want that, and the privacy is the most important thing. But one of the rules of FABYC was that personal privacy was guarded very, very strongly. People had their own bedrooms, their own living space, and you didn't go in. So we shared a house, a flat, an apartment with this couple, Michael and Jennifer. And I would never go into their living room without knocking on the door and saying, you know, please, can I come in? And it would be a privilege to be let in, just as it would be if someone invited you into their house. Whereas the kitchen, that was common ground to all of us. And so was the bathroom, for that matter.
Yeah, so no, that's really, that is interesting. So it was, I mean, I know there is the concept now of co-housing, which talks about this balance between privacy and communality. And I wonder if you see some of those connections, perhaps.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. In Still Green, where I hope if it's finished to move with my wife in a few years' time, we talk about being slipper distance from your neighbours. So
I quite like that.
You have to put something on to go there, but it's still not going outside. It's still not going in the street. It's still a semi-private thing. It's about this idea of being a number of boundaries, and you cross them in turn, and knowing where the boundary should be drawn. And of course, FABYC in its early days had the problem that though some boundaries were very tightly drawn, the fact that they were all in a therapeutic group together meant other boundaries were totally blurred, and they knew all their own intimate secrets of each other. That's a problem.
So did they continue to be a therapeutic group? You know, I know that the stem of FABYC was the therapy, you know, that Catherine Ginsberg was a therapist and then moved in, as you say, with her clients in some senses.
Yeah.
But did it continue along those therapeutic lines?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
Not the children, come to that. The adults, the people who'd chosen to be there. Remember, as children, we didn't choose to be there. But my parents who'd chosen to be there were part of a therapeutic group made up of other adults in the community. In fact, there was more than one group, there were two or three, and later on it merged into one. But the notion that you would meet as a group and talk about quite intimate, difficult problems was very much part of the founding principle.
That must have been quite challenging for some adults, especially the intensity of, we always think, I guess I always think of therapy as, something that you go to, as it were, and then retreat back into that privacy of your own life. But it sounds like as a therapeutic community, it was a more of a much more intense experience.
Yeah. And I think that's what was wrong with it in a way. That was the problem. And as Catherine got older and iller, it got more of a problem. But once she died after 10 years of being at Kew, things changed a lot, and people were much more able to decide when they went, what they went, which bit they want, who they wanted to be with, and so on. So
teenage years sound much smoother than many other people's teenage years I'm aware of, actually. But did you, as a young adult, did you have to make a decision about whether you would leave, or were you invited to stay? How did that work?
I went to train as a teacher. I mean, I left and went back a few times, as people do for home, and then I trained as a teacher and I got a job in Milton Keynes. So no, there's only one person stayed from all my, I mean, there were, I don't know, 30, 40 children. Only one has stayed. He's still there, actually. He still owns a flat there.
And have you all stayed in touch, as...
No, not really.
No. Right.
We meet at funerals and events and things.
Much like most families then, really.
Yeah. And I'm in touch with probably one or two people from that time. No, I didn't stay in touch. I didn't really, in my early adulthood, I would not have wanted to live like that at all. Definitely not.
Which brings us quite neatly to the fact that now you are involved with a forming co-housing group. Would you like to just tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I'm a member of, and so is my wife. We're members of Still Green, an older people's co-housing group that is has plans for development where I live now in Wolverton, and hopefully will be built in the next 2 or 3 years. Been a long time in gestation and been lots of setbacks, but I think we're on the cusp of actually starting to build on a site all of quarter of a mile from where I am at the moment.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. So I'm quite interested in this. Having grown up in community, are you bringing the things that you've learned about living collectively and communal living into your experience with Still Green? But also, what dynamic differences do you see between the model that was set up by families by choice and the co-housing? I know that you have some thoughts around co-housing.
There's I'm just looking at my notes a moment. That on the co-housing website, it says co-housing began in Denmark. The first co-housing community was built in 1972. When I read that, I thought it may be the term co-housing, but co-housing and intentional communities go back eons. They go back forever. Be it religious communities or communities around a common belief system. So I think of co-housing very much as a continuum. So at one end you have tenants associations around an estate, and at the other you might have a therapeutic community or that sort of thing I've described in FABYC. And you also have branches off. So you have religious type communities where people live together, or political collections where people live together. And these are all types of intentional community. And they're all different. And so they should be, because the people living in them are different. So my experience at FABYC leads me to think that what matters is that these communities are free to evolve and change and are not too constrained by rules or expectations or too many policies. And personally, I do worry that certainly Still Green, well, we've got to have a policy on that and we've got to have a policy on this. And while I understand the need for that, especially at the beginning, I also worry that in doing that, you don't get the evolution into what works for that particular group at that time.
But they can be quite constrictive as well as useful.
Yes, and like any institution can be both liberating and restricting, and any institution needs rules to work by, and the trick is to make sure that the rules to work by don't become too restrictive so that you cannot have this growth and evolution. I think that's really important, and I do try to say that when I'm with my colleagues and friends at Still Green. But I'm also very aware that it would be wrong to say this is how it's done because we did it at FABYC and therefore you've got to do it like this. So I try not to bring too much of my past, but I bring me, and I am formed by my past.
I think because co-housing, as you say, is part of a long line of different forms of collective living in all their different forms. And in fact, I've written a number of articles about intentional communities where I would absolutely agree with you that they exist within sort of like the cracks and crevices of mainstream society, and therefore sometimes they do have to have that flexibility to fit into any particular niche or crack or opportunity that exists within that moment in time.
Yeah.
And that's what communities have done traditionally, is that, like we were talking about earlier, housing associations are no longer available, but they were structured in order to make it a possibility for people to live collectively and own collective property. And that is changing and dynamic. Yeah. And as with co-housing.
It's interesting. Before my parents moved to FABYC in Kew in 63, from when I was born in 1960 till 63, they lived in a span house in an estate in Twickenham. Now, span houses were built by an architect called Lyons, Eric Lyons, I think it was. And there was a deliberate attempt to build new estates that had some community about them. And they moved the cars to one side and they had shared green space, but everybody owned their own house. Now, I can just about remember living there, only just. But what I remember is green space, other children to play with, place I could ride my tricycle, go to the sandpit and feel safe with other adults watching over you. And that's what I remember about it from the very early days. But that was a type of intentional community, although at a very, very low level, because in order to make it work, it had to have a very active tenants association. And it was deliberately designed by these architects and developers to do that. And I think my parents chose it for that reason, of course, because they were already involved. But yeah, there is this continuum, and it's really important that we acknowledge that. And it doesn't matter where you are on that continuum, as long as the people are content with it. And it's not oppressing people or being unkind to people. It's also interesting. I'm very interested in the architecture of new estates in Milton Keynes, where I've lived for the best part of 40 years. And the difference between where I live at the moment, which is a Victorian terrace, and some of the new estates in the Victorian terraces, people walk past your front. You see them go past out the window. They see you, you know them. There's a degree of community developed because of the architecture. On some of the new estates in Milton Keynes, that doesn't happen. You don't see your neighbours, you get in your car, you go away, there are no paths to walk past. And therefore they're very, very isolating. And I do worry that many of the new housing estates being built now in this massive rush for housing are built in a way that's isolating rather than creating community. I remember when I first moved, or when I first bought my first property in Milton Keynes, so a year after I was here as a young adult, I went into the supermarket in Wolverton and the person behind the till said to me, "Oh, and do you like your new flat?"
No.
I have no idea who you are, but I said, "Yeah, it's really nice." And some people would think, "Oh, that's much too intrusive. That's much you." But on reflection, I thought, actually, that means I'm part of the community. They know where I am, who I am, and where I've lived, and so on. I mean, I was a teacher in a local school, so I suppose there was also some join there. But actually, the architecture of the Edwardian Victorian housing helped build the community. So that wasn't an intentional community, but the design is really important when you're trying to deal with isolation. And I think that's what we're talking about, not being isolated.
And I think I'm assuming that Still Green, you've probably got drawn up all your plans by now.
Yes.
But that part of that design will have been integrated into your design that you've chosen for your community.
Very much so. It's designed around a common garden, like a horseshoe. Because of the constraints of the site, it's on 3 levels with deck access on the upper 2 levels. So you have to walk past people, but only past 2 flats to get to yours, a maximum. But it's also possible to cross the courtyard to visit somebody without going outside onto the street, as it were. So it's very much designed to be close, to be, as we talk about, slipper distance, but still provide personal space. But there is a lot of shared space as well, and there's a shared house as well.
And do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about the ideas behind senior co-housing specifically?
Well, yeah, the idea is that if you are retired, it is perhaps harder to provide for all your needs and to make sure that you've got social contact. So it's a way of overcoming the potential of isolation in older age. Ideally, you move in when you're relatively young and fit and you stay there. That's the hope. And on what evidence there is would show that people who live in successful co-housing for older people would be healthier, would live slightly longer. And it's not that anyone's providing personal care for another one, but we know that if someone needs it, there would be someone there to help them get it. There's somebody there to look out for you, basically. So it's like just like looking out for your neighbours, really. It's not a wonderfully difficult concept. It's look out for your neighbours and they'll look out for you.
And am I right that if you manage to get over that hurdle of getting spades into the ground, that you will be, would you be the second senior co-housing in Britain?
I don't know. I'd have to check.
I know that obviously, is it called New Ground?
There's New Ground, yeah.
And they're very established now. They've been in place for quite a number of years. But I know that there are a few other senior co-housing bubbling up around the country, but it sounds like you might be at the front of that race.
I think it was when it started. I think, given how long it's taken us to get spades in the ground, I don't think we will be when it's done. But it seems to be a feature of cohousing that it's very, very difficult to get started, get it built, get it funded, and so on.
Yeah, no, it's been really interesting. Now, one thing that we ask all of our guests on the Diggers and Dreamers podcast is if they have any kind of insights or particular nuggets of learning or anything that they would like to share before we come to the end. So I wondered if you had anything in particular that you think is important, or that that you've learned from living collectively, that you would like to share with people who listen to this podcast.
I think it would be about boundaries, and it would be about the way institutions can be both liberating and constricting, and how any organization needs rules to work by, but must also be aware that those rules can become tyrannical in themselves. And negotiating that balance is what we're all about, really.
Great. Paul, it's been really interesting to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming and being a guest with us. Okay, lovely. Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from Diggers and Dreamers, the go-to place for intentional communities in Britain. As ever, it really helps us if you like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget, you can find out more about communal living at our website, diggersandreamers.org.uk. There you'll find an online directory of existing communities and developing groups within the UK, plus interactive notice boards and information about our publications. One you won't want to miss is the Diggers and Dreamers directory, which has been referred to as the Communard's Bible for 35 years. And now, to play us out, here are the Spaceheads with their tribute to our old mate, Gerard Winstanley. See you next time.